My name is Harper Quinn. I'm 34, and I learned the hard way that the people who call you a burden are usually the ones standing on your shoulders. The living room was packed. It was my sister's housewarming, and the granite island under my palm was cold as a headstone. My mother was near the bay window, laughing too loud with a glass of Prosecco tipped toward a neighbor. My father was telling my uncle how hard my sister had worked for this house. The pastor was calling it a blessed family. I set a thin manila folder on that counter, and for one long second, nobody in that room understood that the whole evening had just tilted on its axis. But to understand why one folder emptied that room, you need to go back to an ordinary Tuesday morning 3 weeks earlier and to a decision I had already made before anyone poured the coffee. The last thing my mother said before I opened that folder was simple. "This is a family celebration, Harper. Don't make it about you." She had no idea whose signature was on the paperwork she was standing on top of. If a story has ever made you sit a little straighter in your chair, stay with me. This is one of those. 3 weeks before that party, on a plain Tuesday, my husband Marcus drove us the short stretch across town to my parents' place for breakfast. We did this every week. It was the one tradition I refused to let die, mostly because I was the one holding it together. The house sat on Larkspur Lane, a modest brick rambler with a porch step my father had sworn to fix for 11 years. I loved that kitchen more than made sense. I'd eaten cereal there as a girl, done algebra homework at that table, learned to make a roux at that stove standing beside my grandmother. Marcus parked and squeezed my hand. He knew part of what I was carrying that morning. I was 12 weeks pregnant, and I wanted to tell my parents at a real table, the way ordinary families do it. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I was carrying 2 pieces of news that morning, and only one of them had anything to do with a baby. The other had been sitting quiet in my chest for 7 years, and I had finally decided what to do about it. I remember the smell of scorched coffee drifting through the screen door. I remember Marcus asking, steady as a fence post, if I was ready. I told him yes. I wasn't, not really. You're never fully ready to hand good news to people who've made a hobby of turning it sour. But the decision had been made before we ever backed out of our own driveway, and nothing that happened at that table was going to undo it. I just didn't know yet how fast that table would prove me right. We sat down. My mother poured coffee she didn't bother to sweeten. My father read the classifieds like Marcus and I were part of the furniture. I waited until the eggs were served, because I'm patient, and because some stubborn part of me still wanted the moment to be kind. Then I told them. Marcus and I were expecting. Due in early spring. They were going to be grandparents again. I even smiled. My mother set down her fork, looked at me the way you'd look at a water stain spreading across a ceiling, and laughed. Well, that's just what we needed. Another problem. She let the silence sit, then brightened, genuinely brightened, and said, Meredith just closed on her new house. That's the only good news today. My father didn't even look up right away. When he finally did, he wore that thin smile he saves for when he's about to be cruel and call it honesty. Things would have been easier if you'd never come along, he said. Now there's going to be 2 of you causing trouble. The kitchen went very still. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a dog barked twice and gave up. I felt Marcus tense beside me, felt his forearm go rigid as he started to rise. I put my hand flat against it and pressed him gently back into his chair. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the coffee I very much wanted to throw. I smiled at my mother, smiled at my father, stood up on my own, smoothed my shirt over the small curve that was my daughter, and walked out. My mother called after me that I was being dramatic. My father told me to sit back down and act like an adult. I kept walking, because here's what they didn't know as they watched me go. The house they were sitting into the eggs, the warm air moving through the vents, the roof over all of it had been mine to give and mine to take away for 7 years. Marcus drove us home with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He's a big, quiet man, a former Marine who now runs his own electrical business, and it takes a lot to make his voice shake. It was shaking. No father talks to his daughter like that, he said. No mother laughs at her own grandchild. He wasn't wrong about any of it. I let him carry the anger for both of us, because I didn't have room left for it. I'd spent mine years ago and traded it for something colder and far more useful. When he finally ran out of words, he asked the question I knew was coming. Why did I still drive over there every Tuesday? Why did I still pick up when my mother called? Why, after everything, had I spent years being so faithful to people who treated me like lint on their sleeve? I looked out at the town sliding past the diner, the hardware store, the bank where I'd signed a very quiet piece of paper 7 years earlier and told him the part he'd already half guessed. For 7 years, I had been paying my parents' bills. Not helping. Paying. The electric, the water, the homeowner's insurance, the copay when my father's heart needed a stent. All of it moved quietly out of an account they had never once seen, under a name they never thought to ask about. They believed it was some kind of senior assistance program. They thanked the county. They thanked God. It was me. I had never told them, and I had never told Marcus the full weight of it, because some cracked part of me believed that if I ever stopped holding it all up, everything would collapse and it would be my fault. That was my flaw. I didn't need their love anymore. I just couldn't set the weight down. To understand the weight, you have to understand my grandmother, Opal. She raised me more than my mother ever did. When I was small and my parents were fighting about money, which was constant, I'd walk the 2 blocks to Opal's little house, and she'd put me to work kneading dough while she taught me that a person is measured by what they carry, not what they're handed. She was the one who taught me to keep a ledger. Money, she used to say, is just memory written in ink. A family that won't look at its own memory will lie about everything else. Opal got sick the winter I turned 27. Something fast in her lungs, the kind that folds a strong woman down small in a matter of weeks. Near the end, when it was just the 2 of us and the quiet beeping of machines, she took my hand and asked me to promise something to keep the family from falling apart. I said yes, because you say yes to a dying woman who raised you. Then she did something strange. She pressed a sealed envelope into my palm. Heavy paper, my name across the front in her careful handwriting. She told me not to open it yet. Open it, she said, on the day the family forgets you, and I would know the day when it arrived. I thought that was a grim thing to hand a granddaughter. I locked it in a fireproof box in my closet and didn't open it for 7 years. I kept my promise instead. I held the family up with both hands and told myself that was what she'd meant. I'd learn later, standing in a room full of strangers, that I'd misread her instructions for a very long time. But that Tuesday, driving home, the envelope was still sealed, and the promise was still the only map I had. Here's what my parents never guessed as they watched me walk out of that kitchen. My calm wasn't surrender. It was a decision already 3 hours old. That same morning, before the eggs, before the insults, I had sat in my car in a gravel lot downtown with the engine off and my hands folded in my lap. I had an 8 o'clock appointment. The small brass plaque on the door read Reyes and Fenn, Real Estate and Estate Law. I'd walked in, shaken a lawyer's hand, and signed a stack of intake papers that started a process I'd been circling for a year without the nerve to begin. I didn't tell Marcus where I'd been. I told him it was an errand. The truth is, I had finally decided to stop being the roof everyone stood beneath and forgot existed. My phone had buzzed on the drive over a small banner from a credit monitoring app, some alert I didn't have the bandwidth to read. I swiped it away without thinking. I was thinking about lawyers and babies, not my credit score. That small, careless swipe would come back to matter more than almost anything else in this story. I just didn't know it yet. 6 years earlier, I say 6 because that's when the payments truly started, though the fuse had been lit long before I was 28, a junior bookkeeper still learning to read a balance sheet the way Opal read scripture. I drove to Larkspur Lane one October afternoon to drop off a casserole, and there was a bright yellow notice taped to the front door. I thought it might be a shut-off warning. It was worse. A notice of foreclosure. My parents were 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank had started the machinery that ends with a family standing on the curb beside their own furniture. I stood on that crooked step, casserole going cold in my hands, and felt the floor of my whole childhood tilt. Inside, my father sat in his recliner pretending the paper on the door didn't exist. A mix-up, he said. The economy does this to everybody. A real man handles his own house. My mother sat at the table blaming the bank, the government, the neighbors, everyone but the two of them. Neither had a plan. Neither had told my sister. Neither had told me. They were simply going to lose the house my grandmother had helped them buy, the house I'd learned to walk in, and let it happen in silence, because pride is cheaper than a phone call. I did what I always do. I didn't yell. I sat down at that table, asked for the paperwork, and started reading numbers, because numbers don't lie, and numbers were the only thing in that house still willing to talk to me straight. The balance remaining on the mortgage was around $90,000. Not a fortune, just enough to take a house from two people who'd stopped being able to pay, which is all it ever takes. I asked my father to let me handle it. He waved a hand like he was granting me permission to fail. My mother told me not to embarrass the family by talking to a bank, so I stopped asking and simply acted. Opal had left me a modest inheritance the year before, a little over $30,000 I hadn't touched because spending it felt like admitting she was really gone. I put that down. I took out a small loan in my own name for the rest, the kind a careful bookkeeper with clean credit can get, and quietly bought my parents' house out of foreclosure before it ever reached auction. The deed was recorded. In the space where the owner's name goes, it didn't say Walter Quinn. It didn't say Denise Quinn. It said Harper Quinn. I let my parents keep living there rent-free. I told them the bank had a hardship program for seniors and they didn't need to worry anymore. My father grunted like he'd expected it to work out all along. My mother told her church the Lord provides. Neither ever asked to see a document. Neither ever wondered why the scary yellow notice simply vanished. It vanished because I made it vanish, because I let them believe a comfortable lie instead of an inconvenient daughter. After that, carrying them became the shape of my life. Once you own a roof, you notice every drop of rain. When the furnace died the second winter, I paid for a new one and called it a warranty claim. When my father needed a cardiac stent and the copay would have wiped out their checking account, I moved the money and called it generous insurance. When property taxes came due, they came to me, because the bills came to me, because the house was mine. I watched their accounts the way a nurse watches a monitor, timing my transfers so nothing ever bounced. And every single time, they gave the credit to someone else. My mother stood in Sunday service and testified that God had kept a roof over their heads through hard times. My father told his brother that a hard-working man gets taken care of in the end. They thanked heaven, thanked the government, thanked a pension that barely covered blood pressure medication. Not once in 6 years did either of them wonder if the invisible hand keeping them warm and housed might belong to the daughter they liked the least. I could have told them. Some nights I wanted to, badly. But every time I got close, my mother would mention how well my sister was doing, or my father would remind me that I'd always thought I was better than this family, and I'd swallow it and drive home. Opal used to say pride is the most expensive thing a poor family can buy. She never told me it would be my money paying for theirs. None of this started with the pregnancy. The favoritism was the water I'd grown up swimming in. My sister Meredith got ballet lessons, I got a bus pass and a lecture on gratitude. She got a car at 16, I got a scholarship 2 hours north that my father treated like a personal betrayal. He wanted me home, working locally, staying a girl he could send to fetch things. I left anyway, built a small careful life with Marcus, and he never forgave me for proving I could stand without leaning on him. He didn't hate me because I failed. He hated me because I didn't need him, and a man like my father would rather be needed than loved. You need to understand what that baby meant, so you understand why the word problem landed the way it did. Marcus and I had wanted a child for a long time, and it hadn't come easily. The week before that breakfast, Marcus had painted the spare room a soft sage green, and we'd stood in the doorway with the roller still wet, finally letting ourselves believe it. I had a photo of that wall on my phone, planning to show my mother after I told her the news. I never got the chance. She laughed before I could take it out. That night in the truck, I deleted the photo so I'd stop looking at it. The insult didn't reach me, I had years of practice letting her words slide off. What reached me was that photo. I sat with it in the dark a while, then put the phone away and let my decision harden into something usable. 2 days after that breakfast, my sister called not to ask how I was, not to acknowledge that our parents had wished my child out of existence, but to gush about her new 4-bedroom in the good school district and ask me to build her a housewarming budget spreadsheet, because I was, in her words, so good with the boring stuff. Before hanging up, she added gently, like she was doing me a favor, "Don't make the baby a whole big thing at the party, okay? Mom's stressed enough. Let this be my day." I sat with the phone in my hand a long while after. Somewhere under the insult, my bookkeeper brain snagged on one hard fact and wouldn't release it. Meredith had mentioned, twice now, that our parents had gifted her $40,000 toward her down payment. $40,000. I knew my parents' finances better than they did. The pension deposit landed on the 3rd of the month and was gone by the 10th. Their checking account had never held more than $900 in 6 years of my quiet watching. There was no $40,000 anywhere near that house. And yet here was my sister, crowing about her generous parents, and my mother testifying to the whole congregation about blessings. Money doesn't appear out of testimony. It comes from somewhere, always. And finding the somewhere is a bookkeeper's entire job. That week I went back to see Ms. Reyes, my lawyer. I laid it all out, the foreclosure, the buyout, the deed in my name, 6 years of silent payments. She listened without her expression moving, then told me the truth plainly. Legally, the house was mine, free and clear. My parents weren't owners. They were tenants at will, living in my property with my permission, and under state law, a landlord can end a tenancy at will with a written 30-day notice. "The question isn't whether you can," she said. "You can. The question is what you actually want." I didn't have an answer yet. I wasn't built to put my parents on a curb, whatever they thought of me. But for the first time in 6 years, I understood I wasn't the helpless one at that table. I was the one holding the deed. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't a burden after all. It was leverage, and I'd simply been too dutiful to notice I was holding it. 2 nights later, cleaning notifications off my phone, I finally opened the credit alert I'd swiped away the morning of the breakfast. It wasn't a glitch. It was a real credit card, opened 7 months earlier, in my name, using my social security number, already carrying a balance north of $11,000. I called the fraud line immediately. The account had cleared every identity check because whoever opened it knew everything a bank asks to confirm you, including the answer to the security question, which the representative read back to me in a voice that made the blood leave my face. The answer was Opal. My grandmother's name. A private detail only a handful of people alive would ever think to use. And every one of them shared my last name. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled down the fireproof box, broke the seal on Opal's letter at last, and read it by lamplight. "Harper, my girl. Take care of them even when they cannot see it, because that is what love does. But hear me, a good heart is not a door you leave open so people can wipe their feet and walk through. When they forget you, and they will, remember what I'm telling you now, you were never their burden. You were their roof. Do not let anyone teach you to be ashamed of being the strong one. Be strong on your own terms." I read it 4 times. My grandmother had known, somehow, dying, exactly who these people were and exactly what they'd do to me, and she'd reached 7 years forward to put the right sentence in my hands on the right night. The next morning, I showed Marcus everything, the deed, 6 years of ledgers, the fraudulent card, Opal's letter. He read it all in silence, and when he looked up his eyes were wet. He wasn't angry that I'd done it. He was angry I'd done it alone. "You've carried a mortgage, a household, and a lie by yourself for 6 years, he said, "and you never told me the size of it." I told him I'd been afraid that if anyone helped me hold it, I'd learn it was too heavy and then I'd have to set it down, and it would all fall, and it would be my fault. He took both my hands across the table. "Whatever you decide," he said, "decide it as the woman whose name is on that deed. Not as the girl at that table." I brought everything back to Ms. Reyes, and she traced the money. The $40,000 my parents bragged about hadn't come from savings, there were none. Part came from a line of credit drawn against a house they didn't own, a loan they could only service because my quiet payments had freed up their income. The rest, just over $11,000, was the fraudulent card opened using my name, my birth date, and my grandmother's name as the security answer. My sister's granite countertops had been partly bought with money stolen from me. I traced the paperwork trail further and understood how it happened. When I was 23, My mother had gathered up the family's important documents for safekeeping, birth certificates, social security cards, old pay stubs into a green showbox on the hall closet shelf. I'd handed mine over at a Thanksgiving table without a second thought, 11 years before it mattered. She'd kept that showbox the entire time. Every number a bank could ask for, sitting on a shelf inside a house I now owned, under a roof I paid to keep over it. I built a file the way I'd build one for any client, not to destroy anyone, but to be ready. The clean deed. 6 years of payment records. The bank's trace of the 40,000. The fraudulent statements with my name across the top. All of it into one thin, unremarkable manila folder. I gave my parents a chance first. 6 days before the party, I sat at their kitchen table and offered a door, come clean privately, close the card, put the debt in writing as theirs, and I'd draw up a fair lease so they could stay in that house with dignity for the rest of their lives. My mother's face went white with recognition, then rearranged itself into wounded innocence. She cried the tears she keeps loaded for emergencies and accused me of threatening my sick father over money while carrying another mouth into the world. My father slammed the table and roared that it was his house, that he'd built this family, that no ungrateful daughter would take what was his. My mother looked me dead in the eye and swore there was no credit card, that I had a wild imagination. She lied to my face in the kitchen where she raised me, with the proof already sitting in a lawyer's file drawer. I stood, said, "All right, Mom," and left. The door was closed. They had closed it. My sister called within the hour, having heard everything, and instead of fear, there was smugness in her voice. She said she'd known for years I was helping out, that she and our mother had agreed it was easier to let me stay the responsible one while they enjoyed things, because a guilty daughter pays more than a happy one. Then she called my pregnancy my little situation and told me not to ruin her party. The last soft place in my chest went quiet. The morning of the housewarming, I dressed carefully, a charcoal dress, nothing dramatic. I packed the manila folder into my good bag and Opal's letter into my purse, where it had lived for weeks. Marcus drove us the 20 minutes to Meredith's new neighborhood, past lawns that got greener and driveways that got wider the closer we came to the good school district, and I thought about how my sister had landed on a runway I had unknowingly paved myself. I wasn't nervous. That's the strange thing people ask me about most. I'd spent my whole life nervous around this family, bracing for the next insult. That morning, the nervousness was simply gone, burned off somewhere between the cemetery visit I'd made to read Opal's letter aloud at her graveside, and the closet floor where I'd broken the seal. What remained was quiet, the specific quiet of a woman who's checked the math 3 times and knows it holds. The party was beautiful. Big windows, granite counters, family scattered through every room, Meredith's new neighbors mingling with cousins I saw twice a year. My father sat in the nicest chair like a king surveying a castle he believed he'd built. My mother crossed the room the moment she saw me, gripped my arm in something that looked warm and felt like a warning, and murmured, "This is a family celebration, Harper. Don't make it about you." I smiled the same smile from the breakfast table. "Of course, Mom." Meredith tapped a fork against her glass to call everyone in for a toast. My mother raised her glass first, thanked God, thanked her hard-working daughter who earned every inch of this home, and then, because cruelty is reflex to her the way kindness was to Opal, she smiled at the room and added, "And we're praying for our other daughter too. Harper's got her own little situation on the way, so keep her in your thoughts." A few people chuckled uncertainly. I stepped forward while she was still smiling at her own joke and said, quiet enough that people leaned in to hear, "Mom, before we toast, can I ask you one thing, in front of everyone?" "Of course, darling," she said, spreading her arms for the room. 7 months ago, a credit card was opened in my name. The security answer on the account is Opal. Your own mother's name. Her face fell off. That's the only way I can describe it. The hostess mask slid straight away, and underneath was raw, caught fear, except now there were 40 witnesses and a pastor, and she couldn't cry her way out of a room that had just watched her face confess before her mouth could lie. My father lurched up, bellowing my name the way he always had to make me shrink. I didn't shrink. I'd spent 34 years being made small in front of people, and I was finished. I set the folder on the counter. I laid the pages out one at a time, face up, in a voice you'd use to read a grocery list. The deed, my name where his should never have been. 6 years of payments while he told the town God provided. He roared it was a lie, that it was his house. I turned the page so the pastor could read it too. It said Harper Quinn. Then I turned to my sister, laid out the bank trace and the credit card statement, and told her plainly what her granite counters were really built from. Her face moved through smug, confused, horrified, and finally something like shame. Her husband set down his cup and looked at her like he was seeing the price tag on their marriage for the first time. My mother detonated the loud, practiced cry aimed straight at the pastor, insisting she'd done everything for this family, insisting I was heartless, jealous, twisting everything, always the difficult one. Not one word landed. Everyone in that room had already watched her face confess. The pastor gently took his arm back from her grip. That small, quiet withdrawal did more than any shout of mine could have. I laid down the last page, the 30-day notice Ms. Reyes had drawn up. Mom, this is a notice to quit. Legally I could ask you and Dad to leave. I'm not going to, not if you do one thing. The card gets closed tonight, and the debt in my name becomes your debt in writing, or I file a police report in the morning. Those are the only roads left. You choose. She had no threat left that hadn't already been answered, and no tear left that anyone still believed. The party ended like a tide going out, quiet, then all at once. Neighbors remembered other places to be. My uncle set down his glass by my papers and didn't pick it up again. The pastor paused beside me on his way out and said only that truth has a way of finding the room it needs, and he was sorry it had taken so long to find mine. My 8-year-old niece, Lily, frightened and too young to understand any of the documents but old enough to know every adult had turned to stone, tugged my sleeve and asked if everyone was mad at her. I knelt down and told her none of it was her fault, not one bit, that she had an aunt who loved her no matter what happened between the grown-ups, and that door would always be open. My mother closed the fraudulent card that same night from her phone, standing in my sister's kitchen, because her fear of a police report finally outweighed her pride. She and my father signed papers accepting the debt as theirs. I didn't put them on the curb, that was never who I wanted to be. I had a fair, honest lease drawn up instead, real rent this time, no more lies to cover in secret. My sister kept her house. I'm not in the business of punishing an 8-year-old for her mother's choices. But the shine came off it once the neighborhood learned how it had really been paid for. My daughter was born that spring, healthy, furious, perfect. I named her Opal. When people ask if I still help my family, I tell them the truth, I help where it's honest. I stopped pouring my life into a hole just so other people could stay comfortable calling me the problem. My grandmother was right about everything, 7 years early and 1 sealed letter late. A good heart is not a door you leave open so people can wipe their feet and walk through you. The ones who call you a burden are almost always the ones you've been carrying. I was never their problem. I was their roof for 6 years, and I never even knew it until the day I finally looked up and read my own name on the deed, and stopped being ashamed of being the strong one.